Online people. All right. Transhumanism, AI, lecture five. Um, Today we're going to start really digging into some of the philosophy. I'm going to talk to you about Nietzsche today, um, who's a very interesting fellow. And education's all about getting a well-rounded education, so a bit of philosophy is good for you. Um, and next week we'll do consciousness. So today I'm going to talk to you about Nietzsche. Thursday, those of you on the in-person, we're going to have a discussion in here. I'll talk a bit more about that at the end. The online people will be doing their discussions online. All right. So, before we start, what's happened since what? Hmm?
So the discussion is Thursday?
Yeah, the discussion is Thursday, so you need to be here. I'll be taking attendance and everything. It's an important one not to miss unless you absolutely have to. Okay, so what's been happening in the world since Thursday in the last 4 or 5 days? Interestingly, last lecture I gave you some predictions about the future. And the New York Times, just a couple of days ago, had predictions about the future with AI. So, what did they say? They've got all these experts, some of them are philosophers, some are computer scientists, some are AI CEOs, and they asked them all these questions. What's the biggest bet about the future of AI in the next 5 years? Within 5 years, AI agents are likely to become legal persons in some countries. That's a big statement, isn't it? AI won't have cured cancer or solved physics, but we won't consider the ability to converse fluently a sign of intelligence. So, this idea that we thought chess was an intelligent activity, but as soon as a machine could do it, it wasn't intelligent. Talking like a human is now not going to be an intelligent activity. We'll have AI at the cutting edge of scientific fields. AI won't deliver lasting prosperity. It'll give us productivity tools. This guy says that we won't have AGI, artificial general intelligence, by 2027, probably not in the next 7, 8 years either, which is going against the flow. Most experts believe we will have it by 2030. Medicine. We've seen lots of proof of concept, but we may see more real world applications. AI analyzing large amounts of data. Impact on programming. 80% of developers in 2025 are using AI tools for programming. So software development is now an AI is helping build almost all software in the world. Scientific research. Yes, AI increasingly contains more of the world's knowledge, powerful tools. Transportation, self-driving cars are going to change things. There's a nice one here about education. Nice question about education. AI tutors already outperform most human teachers, which is a bit depressing for me. Yeah. They can make shortcuts tempting. So we need to set aside AI free time that we can actually develop ourselves as humans and learn about things. So now we're moving into more emphasis on in-person tutorial style teaching where students debate and defend their views, which is what we're doing in this class. Education is changing. We can't give people papers anymore. Also, as well as the New York Times, MIT, the MIT Technology Review, published 5 predictions for this year. Just last week, they published these. AI becomes invisible, number one. The era of flashy AI is ending. AI will fade into the background and be embedded in everything. It'll be like a software. It'll disappear. You won't actually know AI is there. AI agents. Most economic promise is on this agentic AI. We will be talking a lot about agentic AI. Systems that work independently for extended periods. How long can an AI system work without human intervention? That's the main question. Scientific breakthroughs. There's a good chance that these AI systems are going to play a big role in new scientific discoveries this year. Vibe coding. The barrier to software creation has been lowered. Non-developers can now build software, fundamentally change who builds software and how fast. And the AI models are going to get better, as particularly in decision making. So these are quite vague predictions, but all the predictions are very similar to the ones I gave you last week, but they came out in the last couple of days. So what else has happened? If you remember on Thursday, I told you about Rubin, NVIDIA announcing the 6 new chipsets for AI, and all the people like Elon Musk, etc., saying how big a deal this was. It's going to revolutionize things. This article I read this morning is just about that. And basically, they're talking about how big this new chipset, new architecture is going to change AI totally. So, the significance of Blackwell, which is NVIDIA's architecture, 2026 cannot be overstated. We are now making the trillion parameter models. So AI models used to have million parameters. Trillion parameter models were only in research labs, but trillion parameter models, we'll be talking about how those work, are coming out into the commercial sector now. Trillion parameter models. These new Rubin chips have 208 billion transistors on each chip. 208 billion transistors on each chip. It's just phenomenal. And they're talking about this kind of idea of hyperscaling, what a big jump this is going to be, the societal impact and trends, talking about this Rubin architecture that's coming in. And basically, we're seeing these gigascale clusters of AI. It's of course they're still liquid cooled, so these things need enormous amounts of power, enormous amounts of water. But yeah, it's this has all been announced in the last week. So Cisco, famous for mainly telecommunications, have just launched a whole set of new products for AI data centers, faster networking, AI agentic ops. The AI data center can now be managed by agentic AI ops. So the data centers are run by AI, and they now have AI defense. So the antivirus systems and stopping attacks on the data center is all run by AI as well. So they've announced all these new systems. When was this? Today, this morning, that came out. In Nature, that you may have heard of the academic journal Nature, new intelligent chip just developed. This is still in a research lab, not available yet. But this chip is another exponential jump in processing power. Again, aimed at AI, they call it a new type of intelligent chip. New architecture uses less power, but an exponential increase in processing power. And this was just announced last week. So this is coming in as well. Computer chips, all the new Rubin architecture chips from NVIDIA are not designed by humans. They're designed by AI. And this company, Cadence, has just introduced a new AI agent to develop new AI chips. So this again came out today. So they just announced this today. AI super agent speeding up chip development by up to 10 times. This is reading this article, it sounds like a pretty big development in AI chip design. AI surgery. AI tools are already used in robotic surgeons in many hospitals. Syracuse Hospital has the Leonardo system, which is a robotic surgery. And they do tend to be better than human surgeons. Really, it's robot-assisted surgery. There's still a human surgeon there. But we've suddenly started getting problems with some of these where the AI is making mistakes. Who do you blame? Do you blame the surgeon who used it, the person who programmed the AI system, the hospital for buying it? It's a tricky one, but this is an AI system that helps with sinus surgeries, and there's been a few problems with it. So again, that was just reported this morning. No, yesterday they were reporting on that. BNY Mellon. Anyone heard of this? BNY Mellon is one of the biggest banks in the world that nobody's ever heard of because they just do commercial stuff. You can't open a checking account with them. BNY stands for Bank of New York. It's the oldest bank in America. It was started by Alexander Hamilton all the way back then. And BNY Mellon holds over $1 trillion in assets, and they've been announced this morning they're now spending $5 billion a year on AI to manage these assets. $5 billion a year on these assets. It's incredible. So yeah, this one of the world's oldest bank reinventing itself. They now have digital employees. So agentic AI running a lot of the functions in the bank that used to be done by humans. So they announced that yesterday. Also yesterday, the first humanoid robot free fighting competition started yesterday in China. So you submit your robots to competition, the robots fight each other in a kind of kumite style, and the one who's left at the end is the winner. So yeah, robot, what do they call it? What are those tournaments called where all the fighting styles are allowed? What? I can't remember. Anyway, so yeah, we have a free combat now, robots basically fighting each other in an arena as a tournament in China. And legally, Elon Musk has had a bad week. In California, the Attorney General has sent a cease and desist letter to XAI, Elon Musk's AI company, because his company is being used to create a lot of pornographic deepfakes of real people and post them, and there are no guardrails on it. So the Attorney General has sent a letter telling them they have to stop their AI system from doing this in California. And in Europe, Grok, which is the LLM, XAI's LLM, is now under investigation for its recommender systems. and how they are not working fairly on a free market. So the European Commission is investigating those. So Elon Musk has had a bit of a bad week. As usual, what can I say about all that? All that happened in the last 4 days, 4 or 5 days since Thursday. So times we live in, and I'm going to keep emphasizing this. This is why we teach this class, why I teach this class, getting you aware of the pace of change, and we will talk more about that. But back to philosophy. Yes. Yeah, the Super Bowl with the AI ads. Yeah. There's an interesting one about advertisements in big sporting events like the Super Bowl. You know, they have adverts on billboards and things and written round the side. You don't notice this, but depending where you watch the Super Bowl, those ads change. They change them in real time on the cameras. So what's actually printed on the ads is not what people are seeing at home. The AI changes it automatically. It's crazy. Yeah. Like deep fake ads, they're not even the real ads. They're being changed. Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't look at Baudrillard until the next class, which is really where we dig into all that stuff about how this stuff isn't real. Yeah.
It's like broadcasting it, that they
They can change it, yeah. And depending where you are, so if it's in another country, it'll be ads for that country. We're basically talking about the Super Bowl and how ads change when you see them. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. All right. So, we're going to start looking at Nietzsche. Um, I introduced him last week with the just the famous saying, um, nothing is true, everything is permitted. His kind of famous saying that came from supposedly came from the 13th century League of Assassins. But we're going to look a little bit in depth. No, I'm going to do a very light surface scan of Nietzsche and his ideas to prepare you to get ready for the discussion on Thursday. So, who was Friedrich Nietzsche? Well, he lived from 1844 to 1900. He had a fantastic mustache. He was the son of a pastor, a religious pastor in Saxony, part of Germany. And his father died when he was 5 years old, and he was raised by his female relatives. He initially studied theology and religion, but left that to study philosophy. He had a mastery of classical literature. He wrote a couple of books on classical literature and got a job as a professor. But he was plagued with illness throughout his life. Most people believe he had syphilis, and which led to many other complications. And he produced all these philosophical, fairly anti-religious works that are some of the foundation of modern philosophy. So, in the Encyclopedia Britannica, says he was a classical scholar, philosopher, and critic of culture. So he was very negative about current culture and that culture should change. He tried to unmask the motives of why people do things in society based on religion, morality, philosophy, and his work has deeply affected generations of theologians, philosophers, psychologists, poets, novelists, playwrights. Incredibly influential guy was Nietzsche. Um, and his most famous observation is the line that God is dead. And I'm going to explain what he means by that to you in a moment. So he's basically one of Europe's most celebrated intellectuals, which is why you should know about him. Um, so just before I start showing you some videos on Nietzsche, I just want to explain about nihilism or nihilism. Nihilism is a belief. It's a branch of philosophy where people believe life is meaningless. So you don't have meaning, you don't have morality, you don't have knowledge. Now, Nietzsche didn't invent this. It comes from Russian philosophers about 100 years before, but Nietzsche was the one who brought this idea of nihilism into common usage. Um, and Nietzsche was very anti-nihilist. All his philosophy is how to overcome nihilism, to give yourself meaning in your life. So he's often seen as the father of nihilism, but that's not true. He was someone who was trying to overcome nihilism, but he made the concept more popular, if you like. More people understood it. Okay, so the first video I'm going to show you is called The Pioneer of the Post-Truth World. This is a video from 2017. It's a little bit political. It's about how politics was changing after the election of Donald Trump and because of politicians in the UK as well. So there was this idea that during Trump's first presidential period, there was this idea of the government put forward this idea of alternative facts, which is a crazy term. It's doesn't make sense, you know. It's an oxymoron. It's either a fact or it isn't. But they put forward this idea of alternative facts, and that's what this video is about, talking about Nietzsche. So
we live in a time of post-truth, so who better to help guide us than Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher of nihilism, where nothing is true, everything is permitted. But Nietzsche, contrary to popular opinion, did not set out to celebrate nihilism. Rather, he sought to diagnose it, to find out if there was a cure. For Nietzsche, the search for truth with a capital T was a fundamentally Christian search. But in his famous essay on the genealogy of morality, he concluded that truth would take the final logical step against itself by discovering that God does not exist. When Nietzsche famously declared that God is dead, he meant that the old transcendental values that religion provided no longer offer a common foundation upon which everyone could agree. And with no basis for truth, everyone could declare their own truths. Nietzsche thought that the news that God is dead had come too early for his time. Well, here we are. So did he see a way to navigate a post-truth world? The people Nietzsche was most interested in talking to were those he considered to be still living under what he called the shadows of God. Those who know that God is dead, but go on living as if he were still alive. That didn't include everyone. Nietzsche was quite happy to contend with the fact that the majority of people could continue to live as if God were still alive. But for those who know that he is dead, there is no turning back. Turning back is to fall into the nihilism Nietzsche was denouncing. Take Richard Spencer, the alt-right leader who claims to have been red-pilled by Nietzsche. He admits that he does not believe in God, but he affirms Christian values anyway as part of his inheritance as a white American. That's nihilistic, not to say racist, precisely what Nietzsche was fighting against. The same can be said of alternative facts that posit the existence of an alternative truth. Such a truth no longer exists, which is why Nietzsche recommended that we observe the world from as many perspectives as possible. To behave as though it does is simply to retreat into a nihilistic affirmation of our own values. Instead, we must go forward. We must find new sources of legitimacy. Already mainstream media.
So, this idea that the world we live in, there is an old set of values, often dictated by Nietzsche was very focused on religion, but we need to develop ourselves and move beyond that and become something else. So, this is a video about Nietzsche in 12 minutes. We're not going to watch all of it. We're going to watch two sections of it. The first bit, we'll watch the start of it, which talks about who Nietzsche is and his very general ideas of philosophy. And then we'll look in particular about this very contentious statement that God is dead. As the guy said, he didn't mean God is dead. He means that religion doesn't have the same place in society it used to have. So let's have a look.
Nietzsche
I
in 12.
apologize. There's no captions with this video, so I apologize for that. They don't work with this video for some reason. I've tried to fix it. I can't.
Minutes. Although Friedrich Nietzsche lived from 1844 to 1900, at the age of 44, he suffered a psychotic breakdown that abruptly ended his productive period as a scholar and philosopher. The common medical account of his madness is that it was probably produced by his having contracted syphilis as a young man. However, scholars still argue about the relationship between Nietzsche's madness and his thought as a philosopher. In part, that's because Nietzsche's thought places so much emphasis on the dynamics of overcoming, a theme that appears early in his most famous work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Basically, overcoming is about exceeding the constrictions and outer boundaries of our dominant patterns of living, perceiving, and especially valuing. In turn, Nietzsche sees overcoming as an expression of the most fundamental motive force in life, the will to power. For Nietzsche, the will to power is a more fundamental motivation than any will to pleasure, truth, or meaning, all of which he sees as subordinate to the will to power. Consequently, for Nietzsche, truth is an expression of power, rather than the other way around. Power for Nietzsche can of course take obvious external forms, such as physical, economic, political, and military power. But the type of power Nietzsche focuses on much more is the kind of power that structures people's habitual modes of perception. Basically, power as it flows across the terrain of subjectivity, and especially through people's values. Consequently, the process of overcoming mainly has to do with transcending our habitual ways of valuing, and hence transcending reality as we typically construe it in terms of our culture's dominant values. Nietzsche calls this process of transcending our already existing values a revaluation or transvaluation of all values. And in some way, his entire body of work represents an attempt to bring it about, both for the reader and for the world more generally. In fact, Nietzsche proposes that a revaluation of values that runs deeply enough can eventually lead the entire human race beyond all that has defined it thus far into a new pattern of life beyond the human. He calls this new possible form of life the Übermensch, or overman. As he puts it bluntly, man is something that must be overcome. People sometimes argue that the character of Zarathustra is a kind of speculative illustration of what the Übermensch might look like. However, Nietzsche claims that humanity is currently far closer to apes than to the Übermensch. So perhaps it's best to treat the Übermensch simply as a place marker for the next evolutionary stage beyond humanity as we've known it thus far. As a consequence of all of this, one way of interpreting Nietzsche's writing is to see it as an attempt to intensify the kind of revaluation of values that would ultimately contribute to humanity's struggle to overcome itself and eventually give birth to the Übermensch. In this regard, Nietzsche's work isn't so much about proposing a new set of alternative values or gleaning new philosophical insights, but about fostering the advent of a new form of life altogether. Of all the kinds of values that could be subject to revaluation.
All right. So, can anyone see why Nietzsche is important to transhumanists? Yeah?
The big word is like overcoming.
Overcoming our existing state of being to be something else. This idea of evolving into something else. Overcoming, transcending, retranscending, all the reevaluating about changing ourselves. He was very concerned with rather than the idea of Superman who has physical the DC comic character who has physical abilities beyond human, he was concerned with this idea of mentally escaping what we have now and becoming something else. So we're trying to transcend all the existing things in society. The terms that we're going to be talking about on Thursday, one group of you are looking particularly at this idea of the Übermensch. They described it there as overman. It actually means overhuman. It doesn't mean overman, but there isn't a word in English that is overhuman. but there's the word overman, so it often gets translated as overman, but it means overhuman. All right. And the other one was this idea of the will to power. Some of you are going to be looking in more detail at that concept. I'm going to introduce you to both those concepts in a minute. So let's have a look at the end of that video, which just explains, just to give you, the God is dead statement is a very provocative statement and it upsets a lot of people, but the way Nietzsche meant it was not the way most people tend to interpret it. So let's have a look at that.
But also by offering a compelling alternative to it. However, Nietzsche also ran afoul of the prevailing Christian ethos by infamously proclaiming the death of God. Some people regard this provocative proclamation as an expression of Nietzsche's supposedly atheistic position. However, saying God is dead would hardly constitute a standard atheistic position, which would hold that God never existed in the first place. Consequently, most people regard Nietzsche's idea of the death of God as more of a historical, sociological observation rather than as a theological pronouncement. Looking back over history, one can't help but be impressed by how central God was to every facet of life for many centuries, especially during the medieval period. Today, however, God is but one of many facets of our shared world, and often not the most important one. There are, of course, still churches and still believers, but God is no longer the singular defining feature of our world, which is a curious destiny for the omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent creator of everything. It is in this sense that God is dead, because he no longer occupies the center point of our shared cultural involvements, as his definition would seemingly require. However, we should probably end on...
So, yeah, the statement that God is dead was not, as he said, not meant in the way most people seem to see it. Nietzsche was talking about the fact that society has changed. Religion used to be the center of most cultures, most societies, and particularly in many Western civilizations, it isn't anymore. It's still there, still prevalent, and people have their beliefs, but it's not the governing structure of our lives anymore, as it was in the past. So, most of you will have seen the movie The Matrix. This is a little clip from a documentary called The Philosophy of the Matrix, talking about Nietzsche with respect to this. Might help you understand some of the concepts a little bit more. The movie starts with a guy called Cornel West talking. Any of you heard of Cornel West? Very interesting character. He was a professor of philosophy at Harvard, at Yale, at Princeton, at the University of Paris. And what's interesting about him is he doesn't just teach philosophy. He's one of the few people in the world who's considered to be an actual philosopher, still developing new philosophy. So he's very interesting. And he's the first guy talking in this, and then it goes on to other people. But
then, of course, Nietzsche is always in the shadow. I mean, you know, God is dead, love is dead, we are dead. How do you come to terms with new conceptions of love after you've crossed the Rubicon, in which you acknowledge that it's not simply about obedience to an authority, it's about creating yourself through choices and decisions.
You have to break out of the herd mentality. Man will overcome man in an ubermensch, a superman. God became man so that man could become God.
Don't think you are. Know you are.
I share with Nietzsche the idea that we're at our best when we're not conscious, which sounds a little wacky, but if you think of athletes in flow, when they're playing at their best, they say they don't even know what they're doing until afterward. And chess grandmasters, I've heard say the same thing, that their arm goes out and makes a move before they even have time to become aware of or think about what's going on.
In Nietzsche's philosophy, there is simply a world of people who are locked into their constructs. They are born into systems of valuation in which one thing is good, another thing is bad, they must do this, they must do that. And what defines the Superman is that he rejects all of those constructs.
Neo, no one has ever done anything like this.
That's why it's going to work.
He doesn't give them force. He sees through them and decides he will use his own will to do what he wants.
The herd mentality can be thought of as the Matrix. Everybody's having a collective hallucination. And everybody's thinking, seeing the same thing and so on, which is just an absolute nightmare for somebody who wants to wake up, and which would be a nightmare for Nietzsche.
So, So this idea of the Matrix.
So this is David Hoffman, filmmaker.
God,
I'm about to show you a short film that is
shut up. All right. No, it's going no worse. So, the Matrix is a prime idea where everyone is living in a simulation, doesn't know it, and only a few people can overcome that, extend their boundaries. Also, an interesting thing in there, which we talked about before, this idea of God becoming man so that man can become God and create the beings himself. So the same kind of philosophical things we're talking about already. The video I'm now going to show you is about Hollywood and Nietzsche, but Nietzsche has a very bad reputation because a few famous people used to quote Nietzsche a lot. People like Hitler, who were concerned with creating a perfect society through genocide, but a society of Aryan white people. And they would use Nietzsche as a justification for that, this idea of creating the Übermensch. But what actually happened, which this video will explain, is that two of Nietzsche's books were not published until after he died. And his sister and his brother, her husband, his brother-in-law, were racists. And they published these books, but rewrote part of them. So the things that are quoted are not Nietzsche at all. He was famously anti-racist, but he's now been associated with Hitler and everything else because of this. Anyway, this video explains that a little bit, and how in Hollywood, they always quote Nietzsche in movies, and they always get it wrong. There we go. So this video's called Hollywood Gets Nietzsche Wrong.
Very much. He's not no God.
Let me turn it down a little bit. There we go.
Upset your mother very much. He's not no God. Just God is dead. Who said that? Nietzsche. He's a 19th century philosopher from Germany. But even if God is dead, you're still gonna kiss his ass. Hey!
Okay, it's Nietzsche, not Nietzsche. But that doesn't change the fact that he's one of the most referenced philosophers in pop culture.
You have a soulmate? I got plenty. Well, name them. Shakespeare, Nietzsche.
Nietzsche was a chauvinist pig who was in love with his sister.
He who would learn to fly one day must first learn to stand and walk. That is not mine, that is Nietzsche's.
In which book did Nietzsche claim that almost all higher culture is based on cruelty? Beyond good and evil.
Blessed are the forgetful, for they get the better even of their blunders. That's Nietzsche. Beyond good and evil.
We all pretty much know his deal, right? He's the 19th century German walrus who believed that everything is meaningless, so you should just overpower everybody else and get what you want. And that makes you that thing called an Übermensch.
You'll never get bored with winning. We never get bored!
And also, Jews are bad, and time goes in a circle.
Time is a flat circle.
I said, Nietzsche, shut the fuck up.
Right? That's Nietzsche, right? No, it's actually not.
You can talk, you just choose not to. Is that Nietzsche? You don't speak because of Friedrich Nietzsche.
Turns out Nietzsche is about as misunderstood as the teenage boys who like him. The real Nietzsche was as subtle in his philosophy as he was iconoclastic.
God has set before you this day his laws of life.
Yes, he believed that moral laws like thou shalt not kill shouldn't come from an objective authority like God or reason. But that doesn't make him a nihilist or even a pessimist. He believed that when we get rid of the idea of objective morality, we can live in a more fulfilling way, where we're not commanded to be selfless, but have no need to be selfish. As Nietzsche says, the consequences of the collapse of moral truths are the opposite of what one might expect. Not at all sad and gloomy, but much more like a new and barely describable type of light. Happiness, relief, amusement, encouragement, dawn. So how did that become this?
What would you like, Jaguar?
The usual. Hundreds of grandchildren, utter domination of known space, and the pleasure of hearing that all my enemies have died in terrible, highly improbable accidents that cannot be connected to me.
After Nietzsche died, his sister inherited his estate, edited his work, and published The Will to Power, promoting an early version of the misinterpreted might makes right Nietzsche. The sister's husband was a famous anti-Semite, and he managed to sneak in some of his views, despite the fact that during his lifetime, Nietzsche wrote his sister and her husband cease and desist letters in which Nietzsche called anti-Semites aborted fetuses. So Nietzsche was definitively anti-Semitic. But all that didn't matter when the Nazis co-opted some of Nietzsche's writing, paraphrasing him and taking him out of context. And so by the time Nietzsche made his way into American pop culture, we were predisposed to getting him wrong.
But obviously you agree with Nietzsche and his theory of the Superman. Yes, I do. So did Hitler.
Which is why finally this Überman...
So, yes, Nietzsche is very misinterpreted. Yeah. Yeah, it's a self-overcoming, very much so. Nietzsche talked about a self-overcoming, and the Nazis took it as a right to power. The powerful overcome the others and do what they believe is right. Yes, he sees it very much like that. Although Nietzsche did have he did also write about society as overcoming its own constrictions as well as the individual. Anyway, so that's who Nietzsche is. Any other comments or questions? He's a fascinating guy. But we're going to talk about a couple of his ideas that you're going to develop. And I'm going to really just define them for you so that you can get some idea before you start discussing them. You have a basic concept of what they are. The first of those with Nietzsche is this idea of the Übermensch or Überhuman, often translated as Overman or Superman. And Nietzsche wrote about this in multiple books, but the most famous one was from Thus Spake Zarathustra. And he says this line, I teach you the overman, man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? And this was his idea, that all beings so far have created something beyond themselves. And do you want to be the ebb of this great flood and go back to the beasts? He often talked about beasts and apes, rather than overcome man. What is the ape to man? A laughing stock or painful embarrassment. And man shall be that for the overman, a laughing stock or painful embarrassment. You've got to remember when Nietzsche was writing, Darwin had just published the theory of evolution. So as we learnt about humans evolving from apes, Nietzsche continued to develop this idea that, yes, we evolved from apes, but where are we going? What are we going to turn into? And this is probably one of Nietzsche's most famous quotes here. Man is a rope tied between a beast and an overman, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. And what can be loved in man is that he's an overture and a going under. So basically, we are in the middle we're on this continuum of developing into something better. We're just a partway stage of that. This caused a lot of people got upset about this idea, of course, as a lot of people got upset about Darwin's ideas at the end of the 19th century. So let's have a look at this idea of the Übermensch in a video. You may want to take some notes just so you're ready. You're each looking up various things on this, just so you have some idea for next week when we come into the discussion of what people are talking about, but it's up to you. All right. So let's have a look at the Superman.
The concept of the Superman is one of the strangest, most fascinating ideas in philosophy. We find it coined by Friedrich Nietzsche in his book of 1883, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. On first hearing it, we can't help but think of the action hero Superman, described by his creators as faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. These are actually very good starting points. DC Comics were asking themselves what someone would be like who was physically far superior to all current human beings. Nietzsche is asking himself a very similar question, only he's interested in psychological qualities. In Thus Spake Zarathustra, Nietzsche points out that evolution cannot be assumed to have finished. Human beings have evolved from apes. But what is ape to man, he asks. In some respects, like imagination and science, we're obviously far superior to our ancestors. So how might people of the future be superior to who we are today? Nietzsche's character Zarathustra's task is to speculate about what the Superman, the more advanced person of tomorrow, will be like. Nietzsche wasn't interested in massively enhanced brain power, an ability to do hugely complex sums in one's head, or to learn a language in 3 days. Rather, he was developing a crucial thought experiment. Suppose we were psychologically superior to people today, what would we be actually like? What is the ideal kind of human being? And he came up with a very surprising and challenging answer. Nietzsche's strategy for answering his own question was to identify the person he most admired, the person he thought had the best approach to life, and then home in on the qualities that made this person the way they were. He was particularly impressed by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, whom he regarded as the nearest anyone had yet come to being a Superman. He also took some hints from Napoleon, Montaigne, Voltaire, and Julius Caesar. He concluded that supermen are going to have some wonderful and sometimes unexpected characteristics. They will make their own values. They'll be very independently minded. They won't ask, what do other people admire, and follow along. They'll carve their own path. Supermen accept that they might need to hurt people in the name of great things. They can be selfish in strategic ways. Greatness for them will be about the reform of humanity towards pagan values, the values of Goethe. Supermen will never be resentful of the success of others. They'll accept suffering as a necessary component of good things. They'll understand that they're hard to understand, and that therefore they may often be lonely. They'll be gentle towards the weak, out of consciousness of their own great strength. They'll be a little bit wicked around sex, by conventional standards. They'll not be humble, but rather delight in their own abilities. They'll be interested in the practical application of culture to raise the mentality of society. Nietzsche thought we would be surprised and sometimes a bit shocked by his list. He thought we'd be expecting that the superhumans of tomorrow would be deeply compassionate, very egalitarian, uninterested in rivalry, and perhaps have ambitions to make breakthroughs in science. But Nietzsche was arguing something else, that maybe being great involves some qualities that are a bit disturbing, and also that greatness means being interested in the salvation of mankind through culture. The word Superman is useful for getting us to think about who we would like to evolve into. Each of us should, under Nietzsche's guidance, have a sense of what we would like to be if we could be the super version of ourselves.
So, this idea of the Superman then was Nietzsche's idea of how we overcome our psychological constraints. What do we need to do to make society better? And the people who do that aren't always the nicest people, but they may make society better. So he had a very strong kind of view on that. And he created this idea of the Übermensch. What I want to show you now is an article that appeared 2 years ago in Fortune magazine. If you're not familiar with Fortune magazine, it's a magazine for CEOs and heads of companies. And this article was called AI, a new superhuman, and the fourth industrial revolution is just the latest revival of Nietzsche's Superman concept. And it begins with the same quote I gave you: man is a rope tied between beast and Superman, or overman, or Übermensch, a rope over an abyss. Man is something that shall be overcome. Now, you've got to remember that when Nietzsche was writing this, he was grappling with what historians call the second industrial revolution, which is the period at the end of the 19th century when we got steam power and electricity, etc., and mass production. What was the first industrial revolution? What sort of things caused the first one then? It took a long time, the first one. Yeah? No? Not factories. Factories were the second one at the end of the 19th century. This is a lot earlier, yeah? The printing press, yeah. It was things like farming, printing press, all those, the fact of commercial activities, really. So if the second industrial revolution was steam power and electricity at about 1900, and if we are entering the fourth one now, what was the third one? What happened between then and now? More recent. What was the third industrial revolution? The internet, computers. Yeah, that was the third revolution. So, but the idea is, and many people believe this, we are entering a fourth revolution now, an epoch change, an era change from the way society was before computers to the way society is after computers is completely different. And we're now entering another change through AI where society is going to change again. And it is commonly known as the fourth industrial revolution. So, Nietzsche, he wasn't famous in his own lifetime, but became famous afterwards. And he believed that society was full of nihilism or nihilism. He also said this thing, God is dead, and he believed that we need to develop into an Übermensch. AI is now here, a modern technology proclaiming a fourth industrial revolution that will give birth to new supermen. And keeps the question, are we still on this rope over the abyss? So this article goes backwards a little bit and talks about the Superman we all know from DC Comics that he could do during the second industrial, it was after the second industrial revolution. We now had cities full of elevators, skyscrapers, cars, and Superman could beat all of those physical things. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive. Even that is industrial in nature. So it was all about overcoming the industry, the physical industry. But Nietzsche's Superman is an embodiment of rejecting the society of the time, which was often governed by religion. So he was saying we need to change society, transcend the Christian church, and advance humans into something else. Um, so this article goes on to say this concept goes hand in hand with transhumanism, which is embraced by modern capitalists, technologists, that we are entering a stage of human development where humans will augment themselves within their environment, which harks back to Nietzsche's vision of man as a rope, something to be overcome. Or in the transhumanist view, the human body is a base for mechanization. So we have this concept of new man, new person, a utopian ideal of a perfect person. So decades after Nietzsche's death, we're still talking about Nietzsche all the time when we talk about transhumanism, even though Nietzsche has been co-opted by these movements like communism and fascism. Even the most casual student knows this is tragically and horrifically wrong. So we have this 21st century digital natives who are now embedded in mainstream and pop culture. Elon Musk, it uses there, is a known transhumanist working on projects to put computer chips in people's brains. We'd mentioned the movies, The Matrix, Blade Runner, even the Barbie movie dabbles in transhumanism. So our popular culture is full of transhumanist thought. So as we round this bend on the fourth industrial revolution, capitalism 2.0, capitalism run by technology, it gives some examples of people who have CEOs who have basically had almost existential crisis over AI and changed their philosophy to work with AI. So Nietzsche's Übermensch, controlled by an infallible set of morals, or comic book Superman. AI, with its 10,000 chip cache of knowledge, or those trillion parameters cache of knowledge. Übermensch and Superman are fictional characters. Yet we have real AI tools now that are guiding us into creating real overmen, or people with advanced capabilities. So AI transforming the workplace. Any comments on that before I move on to something else? Yes.
I guess the transhuman definition seems a bit more physical than his definition.
Yeah, the comment was the transhumanism definition seems a bit more physical, and you're right, it is, which has led Nick Bostrom, one of the most famous transhumanists, to say that Nietzsche's ideas aren't really practical with transhumanism because we're talking about the more physical. But other transhumanists have argued against that, and I've listed some of the articles here. There's a guy called down here. When you get down to Nietzsche and transhumanism down at the bottom, that's what some of these articles are about, are exactly about that. So I want to introduce you to another concept of Nietzsche's, this idea of the will to power. Where are we? So Nietzsche's idea of the will to power, again, you've got to remember at the time, the previous existing philosophy was a guy called Schopenhauer, who wrote about the will to life, that people, animals, humans want to stay alive. Then Darwin came along with his idea of evolution, that the fittest things survive in an environment. And Nietzsche came along with this next idea that humans have this fundamental will to power. And it's a little bit of a different concept. So see if we can. I think I've got it up on here. Yeah, so Nietzsche's concept of the will to power. Nietzsche's will to power is an irrational force that governs our desires and motivations. So the will to power can lead to creativity, self-mastery, or harmful domination over others. This idea that we want to be more powerful than other people often. And the idea of the will to power, many people think it kind of came out of Darwin's writings about survival and evolution. So, there are articles on will to power. We don't have time to go through them, but let's just watch a little video that gives you the basic. Well, again, we're not going to watch all this. We're only going to watch the first couple of minutes.
In Nietzsche's philosophy, the will to power refers to the fundamental driving force behind human behavior. It is characterized by a desire for increase in the exertion of one's capabilities. We see the will to power at work in the athlete trying to get stronger, the artist honing her skills, and in the suffering sick overcoming their ailments. We see it in the lion who seeks to be master of his territory, and likewise in the man that tries to increase his status and self-command. Life itself seeks to constantly overcome what came before, except in the last man, which we'll get into. The will to power is even built into our biology. For instance, testosterone and endorphins increase with victory. Fulfillment and happiness are almost always the result of progress. Some will argue with me here and say family or romance or art bring them joy. And this is true to some degree, but love, relationships, creativity, work, and everything else loses its zest when there's no progress and evolution therein. Without increases in power, all is stagnation. Life becomes dull and gray and sick, and this is a danger for the individual, but even more so for all of humanity. Quote, "What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man. What is bad? All that proceeds from weakness. What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that a resistance is overcome." Nietzsche. This statement encapsulates an essential core of Nietzsche's philosophy. Weakness leads to corruption and evil. Only strength promotes nobility and goodness. Look at your own life. When you are strong and courageous, you move forward. You overcome addictions and vices and actualize your potential. But when you live in weakness, your lower nature wins. You make excuses and stagnate and fall from integrity. As a result, corruption and resentment multiply and win. This is why to Nietzsche, and in my own philosophy, power is at the top of the hierarchy. All other values like family, compassion, happiness, integrity, and even wisdom are beneath it. There can be no...
You can see it's very much... I personally don't agree with Nietzsche's will to power. I don't think it's the way most humans work, but Nietzsche did believe in this, and he thought this was the way we will overcome our restrictions of society. So to finish, I want to just try and link Nietzsche a bit more to transhumanism before we have the discussion next week. So there are some links on here to more videos on the Übermensch if you're looking at that, if you're in a group looking at that. If you're looking at will to power, there are much longer videos and more articles, but I expect you to do your own research as well and look at things yourself. And there's a section on Nietzsche and transhumanism. And this particular video here, and one of the articles down at the bottom, Nietzsche's post-human, I think it's the first one, Nietzsche, the Overman and Transhumanism. This guy, Stefan Lawrence Sogner, talks in particular against Bostrom's idea that Nietzsche doesn't fit with transhumanism that much. So what I want to do is show you this article that this is an analysis of Nietzsche and transhumanism. And it shows how many papers were published each year on transhumanism. In 2018, there were 1,800 papers published on transhumanism, nearly 1,700 in 2019. How many of those were about Nietzsche and transhumanism? A quarter to a third of them talk about Nietzsche when they're discussing transhumanism. So this is why we have to study Nietzsche. Yeah, everybody talks about him when you talk about transhumanism. So you need to know who he is, what his thought was before you can really start to break down when we get into some of the more advanced things about transhumanism. Okay. And everyone say, most transhumanists quote Nietzsche.
I'd say that Nietzsche is in many ways the prophet of transhumanism. And a lot of people don't think of it this way. A lot of people have a very laudatory perception of Friedrich Nietzsche. They don't have a very laudatory perception of Friedrich Nietzsche. And I believe that he gave transhumanists the roadmap because, as you rightly say, the impetus of Darwinism, of evolution by natural selection, is natural selection. Right, that's the of evolution by natural selection is natural selection. It's this blind process. The impetus of Nietzschean evolution is the will to power.
So yeah, this idea that natural selection and Darwinism is where the survival of the fittest in any environment, the species that adapts to suit the environment will survive. Whereas what that guy was saying is that when you consider transhumanism, we are directly trying to make changes to evolve humans to the next stage, and it's not some random process. We're thinking about it and planning where we're going to be. So let's have another look at another short video about Nietzsche and transhumanism.
So Nietzsche says human beings are animals that are like a bridge between an animal and something else, and we just don't know what that something else is yet. Meaning, to be a human being is to bridge the world between animal and something not yet to become. And what that might be is determined by will, according to Nietzsche, what we choose to be. As we rise above the lack of purpose that we don't have, we rise above it to create our own purpose, you might say, to define what it is that we will become, and we don't know what that is yet. Transhumanism, about 100 and so years later, today, it's a collection of people with different interests, right? But generally speaking, it seems to be a collection of people that say that we are a bridge between the animal world and what will become.
So yeah. So very much.
He released 4 albums.
We are on this bridge between the animal and the next stage of evolution. Yeah.
Nietzsche more focuses on like self.
What, sorry?
Nietzsche focuses more on self, while it seems like transhumanists are more focused on humans. And I feel like that's like the key.
I don't know. The question was Nietzsche focuses more on self, whereas transhumanists focus more on human beings generally. I'm not sure about that. Nietzsche talks about individuals developing, overcoming the constrictions of society, but the reason for them doing this is to make society better. So he's still got that idea that we will make society better by willing ourselves to be better rather than natural selection. Yeah. So I think there's one more article I want to. So this is the one, the article I was talking about just before we finish. This is that guy, Stefan Lorenz Sigona, Nietzsche, the Overman and Transhumanism. This is a really good paper. Notice it's in the Journal of Evolution and Technology, which is interesting. But this talks about Bostrom rejecting Nietzsche as an ancestor of the transhumanist movement. Even though Bostrom claims there are similarities, he doesn't put Nietzsche front and center. And so Sagona argues against this in this article. And it's a really good article to read about Nietzsche and the post-human. So when I first became familiar with transhumanists, there are similarities between transhumanism and Nietzsche, particularly the post-human and Nietzsche's overman that he wants to show. And he contrasts with Bostrom. And there's some very interesting ideas in this one when you start to get into the sections on science, enhancement, education, and how the Nietzschean and transhumanist outlooks on society. Nietzsche's respect for critical thinking was immense, and he was a critic of morality and religion. But let me find the bit I wanted to talk about. So he talks about, again, there's this link with Darwin and the theories of Darwin, but the idea that the struggle for existence or a will to life is a fundamental human drive from which he feels a need to distinguish himself. This idea of the will to power, humans strive for power, the struggle over existing society. So what you're trying to do is enhance yourself. Enhancement is what the transhumanists are aiming for or believe is inevitably going to happen to humans. Enhancement of intellectual, physical, and emotional capabilities. Bostrom said that. So post-humans will come into existence. But Bostrom emphasizes the more at the idea that through transhumanism, we will create a better society, which, to be honest, is exactly what Nietzsche was saying, that we will develop ourselves to create a better society. So that's why we talk about Nietzsche so much. Now, any final comments or questions before I just talk about worksheet 3? All right. So worksheet 3, you've each been assigned something from Nietzsche to research yourself. Something about Übermensch. Some of you are looking at the Übermensch. Some of you are looking at the will to power. Some of you are looking specifically about parallels between Nietzsche and transhumanism. What we are going to do on Thursday, the way I want this to run, and the online people, I want you to run your online meetings like this, is each group, each person, if you studied the Übermensch, you're going to teach the other people about the Übermensch. If you studied will to power, you're going to teach the others about will to power. There are thousands and thousands of books on Nietzsche and work on Nietzsche and analyzing all this. So there's lots of material out there. The philosophy is hard to read. So use AI to help you understand this. Yeah. I don't have any problem with you using AI to help you understand it, to summarize things for you. But what I expect you to do, don't turn up with just definitions of what an Übermensch is. I've done that. You know, I'm looking for you to find more that you can tell other people about, particularly, and your own thoughts as well. What do you think about it? Do you agree or not agree? Think through that. But definitely, before you have these meetings, make notes. You might even make notes for the other people in the meeting, you know, whatever you want to do. But think of it that you're teaching someone on each of these subjects, yeah? We're going to have the meeting in class. It will probably be, it probably won't be for the full lecture, okay? So it'll probably be about half an hour or so, but we'll see. If people are talking and want to keep talking, we'll keep talking, okay? Everyone good? Any questions, comments? You're all okay? All right, we're going to get you talking on Thursday.